Hi, you're listening to Book Chat with author Vivian E. Moore.
Welcome, everybody, to this week's episode. We really appreciate you joining us. This podcast really shows us how we can all learn, live, and thrive off of each other. By sharing our knowledge through our conversations, we will impart some knowledge whilst learning ourselves how to progress even further. Here is your host.
Hello and welcome to Book Chat. I am your host, author Vivian E. Moore. I hope everyone had a great week and I hope that you're having an even better weekend. All right, we're going to get straight to today's show. The title is Conflict and Confusion, and the topic is how the right balance elevates a story. Well, have you ever read a book and thought, well, this is good, but something is missing? Okay, well, maybe the characters were interesting and the words in the worlds was rich, but the story just didn't grab you. Okay, that missing piece that often comes down to one thing: conflict. I remember growing up and we didn't have a lot of squabbles in our house, but sometimes you had that occasional conflict that would arise. And my mother was a strong disciplinarian, and she would always say, well, we're going to have peace out of confusion. Well, in this case, when we're talking about books and writing stories, you need conflict and confusion, right? You need that to elevate your story. And more than not, if you don't have those two elements, then those are the missing pieces that could really take your story to the next level. But the first thing is you just can't have conflict. You have to have the right amount, and it has to be layered with just enough confusion to keep you turning pages. Okay. So, we've all read books, we've seen movies that, they were just sort of, they really didn't hit that spot. Okay. So in order to do that, you have to have the right balance of conflict and confusion, not too much of this and not too little of that. Okay. Because I'm going to tell you now why conflict matters. Well, conflict is the heartbeat of a convincing narrative. Okay, you got to have it in there. Unless you're even in children's stories, sometimes you have, well, not sometimes, but most of the time there is conflict in those stories. The children, even in children's stories, the children are battling some type of conflict and confusion, and by the end of the story, it is all settled. Well, that is the going thing, or the right elements for each and every story. You got to have it. I don't care if it's sweet and gentle, or just terror filled. You have to have the right amount of conflict and confusion, not too much and not too little. Okay. And without it, a story just feels flat. Okay. It is predictable, and the stakes are so low that, why even get into reading the story? Why commit to it or invest your time into reading something that is just not grabbing your attention and holding you there? Okay. Now, we don't want it in there just for gratuity's sake. Okay. It has to have a purpose, and all stories should have some conflict and confusion in them, because every story needs that. Conflict, what it does is it introduces the tension and the urgency, and it sort of lowers all of that unpredictability, right? Maybe not lower, but adds to the unpredictability, because we don't want a story so easily to read that it's so predictable that you don't even have to go to the end of the story to find out what happened. You already know. Okay. And you just flip the pages to get to the end of it to confirm what you knew from the beginning. All right. So we don't want that. We have to have the right amount of tension, urgency, and unpredictability. Okay. I hope I made that clear as mud. All right. So those elements, they drive the plot forward, and then they force the characters to also evolve. And we need to see that in all stories. We need to see the characters change at some point. We don't want them, to stay in that at that same level. Something has to happen that helps them to evolve. Okay. But not all conflict is sword fights or screaming matches. Okay. It could be internal, as to say, a character's fear of failure, or it could be relational, of betrayal between friends or family, or it could also be situational. It's like a ticking clock, or some, forthcoming natural disaster. Okay. But these are the keys that to something that is standing in the way of what the characters want. Okay. So now this is where confusion enters into the room. All right. So now it should get interesting at this point once confusion enters. All right. Because confusion, when it is used purposefully, it adds that level of depth that you need in each and every story. It doesn't mean that your readers are lost. It just means that they are now intrigued, and that's what we want to do. Okay, we want to take it to the next level. So throwing in just the right amount of mystery and that misunderstanding, or just shifting perspectives, all of that, it raises the stakes, and then it keeps the readers engaged. And that's what we want to do, is to keep those readers reading. Okay, so think of it this way. So we know that conflict pulls the readers in, right? So while confusion keeps them engaged. You see how that works out, how that balance is there. It has the right balance. We want to pull them into the story, and we also want them to be engaged, okay, while they're reading the story. So together, what they do is they create a rhythm of tension, and they release and they release that makes a story impossible to put down. Okay, that's what we want. That's what we want to see happen. Okay, we need that. All right, so now this is where the balancing act comes in. Too much conflict without clarity, that in itself can feel chaotic and frustrating. Okay, there has to be a method to the madness. All right, you just can't throw it in there and not make it make sense. Okay, so that's where, if you have too little of conflict and confusion, the story is going to drag. And we don't want that to happen, because it's boring. Who wants to read a boring story? You want something that's going to captivate you, keep you engaged, keep you reading, chapter after chapter after chapter, all the way until you get to the end. That is the purpose of having that right balance, that correct balance and act between conflict and confusion. And then too, if you have too much confusion, that will also get the readers just lost. Okay, it's like they don't know what's going on. So probably what will happen is, at that point in time, they'll just fold the book up, or just click on another ebook and read that instead of this one. But when you have the right balance, guess what happens? It becomes magical. Okay, so I'm going to tell you a few ways to help you find the right balance. Okay, so first of all, you need to introduce the conflict early. Okay, but you need to also leave room for it to develop, okay, because that's very necessary as well. And you also need to let the characters make mistakes. We don't want perfect characters, because we know that is not realistic. And when you have misunderstandings, that can drive emotional tension and also plot twist. Okay, so you need to foreshadow smartly. You need to drop those hints without revealing everything that will keep the readers guessing and not confused. And then you need to pace your reveals. Okay, so don't explain everything at once. You need to build that curiosity. So, just the short version of everything that I just told you is that you need conflict to create tension. Okay, you need confusion to create intrigue. Those two things go together perfectly like peanut butter and jelly. Okay, they just make sense together. And you also need to weave these things together, with just a little bit of care, because they elevate your story from pretty good to completely unforgettable. Now, we've talked about having those unforgettable stories, those unforgettable characters that just stay with us, long after we finish reading any book, especially a book that made an impact on us. It made an impression. It left an impression on us. So those, or had all of those stories that left those impressions, they had the right amount of conflict and confusion, and you need that. Okay. So, so the next time that you're plotting a scene or you are revising a chapter, you need to ask yourself, what is at stake in this story? What are all the points that you can hit on that will elevate the story? And you also need to ask yourself, what don't the characters or the readers know yet? Okay, you don't want to disclose too much in the beginning, but you want to leave those breadcrumbs for them to find their way through that story to actually get to what you already know, but you want to let the readers, find their way through slowly. But when you have the right amount of conflict and confusion, that will happen, because they won't be able to put the book down. They will be completely engaged in the story. And they will not want to stop reading it until they finally get to the end of it to say, oh, wow, I am so surprised, and that story was actually, it was pretty awesome, and awesome over awful is always good. Okay. So, in the end, the stories that linger with you, those are the ones that always keep us wondering and wanting more. Okay, so guys, that is it for today. And next Saturday, since that is the 4th of July weekend, we will not have an episode, but you can go back if you want to over your weekend, your long weekend, and and listen to some of those earlier episodes of Book Chat, if you will. And it'll catch you up to everything thus far. And then the next weekend, we will have a new episode of Book Chat. And I hope that you will tune in and listen for that. And not only tune in and listen, but listen, like, and share, and follow. You can follow me on through Podbean, or you can follow me through all of my social media. That would be Facebook, TikTok, Instagram. I'm trying to think what else. Lemonade. I can't think of the other ones, but anyway, I'm out there if you want to follow me. Okay, and I appreciate all of the love and all of the downloads that I get on a weekly basis. I'm so thankful for that. Okay, so like I always say before I end each and every episode, always tell those who you care about the most how you feel about them, because tomorrow is not promised. Today may be the only chance you get to say it. So on that note, I love you. I hope you love me back. And until the next time you hear my voice, God bless you and goodbye.
Loved what you've heard on this week's episode? Well, the answer is simple. It would mean the world to us if you could head over to iTunes and leave us a 5-star review and feedback. Spreading the word really is the best way to grow our podcast and achieve even greater things. Thank you.